good afternoon,
Good
everybody.
afternoon.
We're going to spend a little bit more time making sure that we're actually sat properly this time, aren't we? Because we got feedback last week that Alistair looked like a ventriloquist dummy.
Yes, thank you very much.
We just had it.
And that the desk was wonky, so yeah, we've spent some time today trying not to look like a ventriloquist dummy and also make sure our desk is not on the wonk.
So, all good. I think, are we ready to...
Non-clashing outfits, desk straight, not
Ready to
ventriloquist dummy, ready to go.
No, that's fantastic. Just let me as well just get my iPad working so that I can see the questions that come through. It was all set up ready to go and now it's decided not to be.
And we've had a group of people outside the window cutting down a tree, which is not what you want just when you're about to start a live. All about creativity. So we got really creative and they've stopped cutting down the tree and we've closed the window and we're sorted.
We think we're all good.
We're good.
Okie dokie, so let's begin. So this live is about creativity and it is one of my favourite subjects. I think possibly because I was one of those mums that used to focus on output rather than process, which is one of our hot topics for today. So I myself went on a massive learning curve about how important creativity was and what it really means. And I think if you ask many parents about creativity, they'll often talk about painting and drawing and arts and crafts, and what I sort of had my eyes open to was that there is just so much more to it than that. And I think maybe as a starting point, we could just explore what is creativity, but in its sort of broadest terms, and why is it important for children and their learning?
Yeah, and I think it's just kind of how our society is, that we look at the creative arts and we think very much about that kind of arts angle. But actually creativity, as we've talked about a lot on our lives, because it's kind of integral to what we do on the app, is that creativity is also about how you think and about who you are. So you can be a really creative person who's not necessarily somebody who enjoys art. I mean, there is an argument that everybody's artistic. It's just about you become very good at the things that you enjoy. So there is an argument that it's in us all somewhere. There's a seed that just needs to be watered. But actually creativity we're going to talk about in its broadest sense. And also we kind of call this becoming creative. And I think there's a lot of research that says you are born with the ability to be creative. So it's not about becoming creative, it's about enhancing your creativity, which probably would have been a better title.
We're already living and learning again.
We are.
Wrong titles, never mind.
Cross it out.
I think with my old hat on, my previous role, I was a nursery owner. And creativity was definitely misunderstood a lot by the colleagues and by the parents. And there was a lot of pressure to begin with when we first opened about what's my child bringing home from nursery? You know, where's the beautiful artwork? Where's the card that they've created, or the handprint that's been turned into a reindeer or an Easter bunny or something like that? And we went on quite a journey ourselves to step away from the output and really start to focus on the learning process. But in doing that, we really had to win over parents a lot, and we did loads of workshops about how important creativity was and what it really looks like. And weaning parents off this sort of Instagram world where it's all about the setup and it's all about what it looks like at the end.
It is, and I think if you look on Instagram, as parents, you'll know that a lot of the accounts that you will look at for ideas for and inspiration for, a lot of very process lacking, outcome driven activities. So you get things like, I saw one the other day, it was making Easter eggs out of a potato masher, where the paper was all set out, the paint was all set out, and the idea was you print with a potato masher. And again, nobody dies. These are not terrible, heinous crimes against children. But when we're thinking about really developing, and what we talk about a lot in my first 5 years is the authentic child, so having a realistic expectation of what a child will be able to do and produce at their stage of development, so not their age, where they are in terms of their creativity, then you want to give them as many opportunities as possible to be authentic. And so sometimes as parents, you can look at what a child produces, and through your very curated parent eye, it's a bit like, oh, that's interesting, or they've just scribbled all over that bit of paper, or I drew that beautiful outline for them and now they've gone outside the lines. But I think we need to reframe that and think, right, is this authentic to where my child is at? And then begin to really value what children produce over that kind of really nicely curated thing that we might want to see as adults, and start to be really boastful about the fact that actually what you're looking at here is my child exploring making marks, my child exploring thinking, my child exploring mark making their thoughts, rather than we've managed to produce a beautiful Easter egg that I drew it and they painted it in. And again, there is, it's not the end of the world if that happens, but there is greater value in the process.
Yeah, we've just had St Patrick's Day, and there was loads of sort of leprechaun pictures where children were just given sticky orange beards. It's just, it's not what St Patrick's Day is about at all. But it was just so restrictive what children were being asked to do. And I look at these actually and think they are really therapeutic things to do, but for adults.
Yeah.
So I really could see myself enjoying being there with the masher and creating this bit of artwork, because I'm not particularly good at art. I guess I've got that thing in my head that I can't do.
Yeah.
And of course I can, but if someone gives me a set of instructions to follow and something will look pretty at the end of it, then I get why an adult would find that quite therapeutic, but you're actually switching your brain off to do that. You're not thinking much.
You are. So what we're thinking there is, if you've got a process to follow, so there are some cognitive benefits in that, so children need to learn to follow instructions in order. So if you are making a something that looks like a something out of some somethings that are all predetermined, then it's a very small amount of learning, but the learning that you are doing is following an instruction, doing things in order and producing an end result, but it is quite narrowing. If you're thinking about cognitive development and you say to children, right, you've got a range of things to do, or a range of problems to solve, or a range of things to think about, and you can interpret those as makes sense to you, and I as an adult will help you interpret that, then you come to your own conclusion. Loads of bits of your brain are working. You're retrieving old knowledge that you've already got, you're making new knowledge, you're taking in sensory experience, you're having to think, you're having to predict, you're having to respond, you've got cause and effect, you've got strategizing, you might have interaction, so you might have verbal interaction, non-verbal interaction, you might have a raise in self-esteem, you might have a raise in confidence, you might have a lowering of self-esteem because you can't figure out the problem. So you're going through a myriad of really useful cognitive and sensory experiences by the exploration of the open-ended resource. And they ultimately will build a much bigger bank for your child to be able to fall back on than just being able to follow the instructions to make a leprechaun or to print a shamrock with a toilet roll tube, which I also saw on Instagram.
It's literally awash with these ideas. I honestly think it is adults that come up with these ideas, and I do think adults genuinely find them therapeutic as adults, but I think for children they're really quite boring because they've just been asked to do this, do that, do the other. And I also used to see a lot of grabbing of the hand to make sure that it was positioned in the right place. So really controlling.
Let me just help your hand while you do that. But also, and that's because adults, I think, want to produce something that's recognisable. So it's great as an adult to be able to say, look what so-and-so made when they've made an Easter bunny out of a paper plate with stick-on ears. And again, it's not the end of the world. But what we need to get much better at as adults and parents and educators is really recognising that authenticness of what children produce. So it should look like a child of that level of experience has produced it. And then we can really revel in the joy of this is where they were, this is where they are now, this is where we might go next, these are opportunities we can give them. And that's so much more real than having kind of, 3 or 4 or 5 or 20 things that look exactly the same.
I think as well because, and it was you that opened my eyes to it obviously when you were working with me in my nursery days, but I began to really value the scribble, and we can explore that word in a minute, but when you began to value it and keep the odd piece of it, I sort of kept them in a book in the end, and you really did see the progression. And to begin with, it was very much continuous lines, nothing was coming on and off the paper. And then I remember you pointing out to me, but this has changed now, because what she's doing is she's actually drawing some lines and she's taking a mark making tool on and off the paper, or she might be beginning to do recognisable circles. And there was that progression, and I've kept it all. I might do a blog on it where we start with a scribble and we go to the lines and the circles. And I think her next thing then was, it wasn't a spider, it was a woodlice. That's what she told me. Yeah. And it had loads of little legs off the circle. And it's just a joy when you understand what you're seeing a bit more and keeping those examples. you get to see the journey.
So it is a joy. You drawing it while you're talking. So you've got little lines in your circles. So yeah, and that's exactly part of it. There is a definite development that children go through in terms of their drawings and how they make lines, which is linked to their physicality. But also, when we're talking about true creativity, we're talking about the thinking, the creative thinking that goes behind the decision making to be a mark maker or to draw. And the more that you can support that creative thinking by giving lots of examples, but also opportunities, then children tend to do things that are purposeful and meaningful. And what can happen is that, and we've talked about this before, if you give your children lots of positive reinforcements for doing very outcome-driven art that looks like the example, they learn to please really. And so subconsciously they begin to think, well, I want to stay inside the lines, I want to produce something to please the adult. And if we can reframe that slightly and start to really praise the idea that, oh, you stayed and did that for a long time, you've really explored that, I love how you've mixed that paint, talk to me about what you've made, we begin to associate the creative thinking and the creative process with a positive. Because what lots of children do, and it's usually as a result of adults, is disassociate themselves from the creative process with their real aim to want to please. And I know, and Jennie will know from nursery days, and I know from working with settings, that parents will do things like bring children to school and say, can they not paint today because they've got this on, or can they not go out in the mud today because they've got their coat on? And actually, it's about thinking when your child is in a setting, and at home, but especially in a setting, you want them to have those experiences. So really the muckier the child when they come home, probably the more creative a day they've had. And I mean creative in terms of that thinking process. So again, for parents, it's about thinking, well, I need to then send my child into the setting or create opportunities at home where it doesn't matter if you get dirty, because actually getting dirty is part of the process.
Yeah, I know for me getting outdoors to do a lot of this stuff was a really easy way of meaning that the mess didn't matter as much, and in all weathers as well. I mean, obviously if it's absolutely tipping down with rain, we're probably not going to go out with pieces of paper, but there is loads that you can do outside that really encourage children to mark make, and it doesn't need to be on pieces of paper. It can be on the pavement, it can be on the fence, it can be on the wall. And I'm not suggesting they start vandalising with, crayons and permanent markers on the wall, but there are things you can use that either wash off like chalks, or there are things you can use like water, where you're literally using water on a paintbrush and still creating something. And then you've also got all the science of it drying up and it disappearing and the thinking behind that.
And sometimes children will do things like, and often do, write all over your walls, and it's not always a result of them intentionally trying to demonstrate inappropriate behaviours. When we're talking about real creativity, and again trying to reframe some of the things as parents that really drive you mad, I can remember when my eldest was 3, so the one under him would be about 2, his name appeared sort of written on our downstairs hall very expensive wallpaper in black marker. And we kind of said to him, who's done that? And he just said, not me. Now, looking back, clearly it was him. Thinking about it now, the creativity of experimenting with writing on the wall was great for his creative development. He demonstrated an ability to lie, which also shows really good creative development. It genuinely does. You have to reach a certain cognitive level to be able to process lying. So in that moment as a parent, I did not say, well, I'm really thrilled you've drawn on our expensive wallpaper in black market and then lied about it. Woohoo! I was very cross. But looking back, there were real signs of him developing his creativity, and maybe I could have taken a shred of that to help me be less mad about the wallpaper.
Although we're not advocating that we want children to become accomplished liars and accomplished vandals.
We're not, but, and obviously when you talk about lying, which is a whole other lie, it's about the consequences of telling a lie, but in the back of your parent brain you can be thinking, oh, well, at least we're seeing some really good cognitive development, that you understand the world of truth and the world of fiction, and the fact that you can create truth that isn't fantasy but lives inside the world of truth that means you've told a lie. So yes, we don't want the world to be full of children who tell lies, although again research would say that all of us tell at least one lie every single day, if not more. We want to recognise that there is development in these stages.
And one of the things that we used to do at nursery and at home was make sure that there were loads of opportunities for mark making where the children didn't have to come and ask for it. So, you know, if we can have pads of paper or scrap paper or boxes and pens and pencils at their level, then they're much more likely to scribble on the box or scribble on the paper rather than the wallpaper. So it's an innate urge, I think, to do these things. So if we can create opportunity for them to do it in a more appropriate way, then that's a good thing as well.
I think we talk a lot about the app, and we talk a lot about the fact that we have skills in the app, but also activities. And what we do through the activities is they are underpinned with lots of them with this sense of creativity. So even though it might not be a crafty activity as such, and very few of them will, if any would be to maker, it's about exploring creativity. So we're thinking about creativity in its broader sense around that kind of creative thinking. So the app is full of activities and interactions, so not just activities to do, that are literally laser focused to where your child is in their development. So the activities that you find are ones that really support that development.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to them at their stage right now, rather than something that's just not appropriate for where they are. We've had a few questions come through. Are you all right to dive into some of the Q&A? I think this is an interesting one. So this is a slightly older child. I think child's about 3.5, 4 years old. And I've always given my child colouring books, and I think this mum's been listening to some of our lives about creativity, and we quite often talk about blank sheets of paper. And she's saying, I'm trying to introduce her to your blank canvas ideas, but she doesn't seem to know what to do.
Well, this links a little bit back to what we've just talked about, in terms that when children get very used to a way of being, or very used to a way of being creative, then when you suddenly present them with a really open option, they're a bit like, hang on a minute, you know, I'm not quite sure what I do with this. And it's all linked to confidence, like we said last week. Yeah. I know that I can colour in, I know I can colour in between the lines, I know I get praised by adults for doing it, and therefore it brings me pleasure, and therefore I do more of it. You suddenly give me a blank sheet of paper and I'm not sure what I want to draw, and can I draw a horse, because I'm really used to colouring in a horse that looks like a horse. So children get very quickly into these kind of negative confidence bubbles where they're thinking, I can't do that. So I think when you are introducing a more open-ended creative experience linked to making marks on paper, it's that idea of introducing it slowly, that it's modelled by adults. And when I say modelled, I don't mean necessarily this is how you draw a horse. No. It's about saying, right, or what am I going to do? I was thinking I might draw this today, or I might get these felt tips out, I might just colour in. Or we read that book, do you remember? And we talked about that illustration in the book, I might see if I can do that. So it's about scaffolding ideas, where also as the adult, you're saying, well, I might do this and just have a go. And also scaffolding all of that kind of confidence piece around, I'm going to have a go, I'm not sure that I can, but if I don't get it right first time, I know if I keep practicing, or maybe I need to look at that again and think about how I could make it different. So what you're feeding then is all the really positive messages that adult who I look up to is also showing that they're fallible, they're giving me strategies for what to do if things don't go wrong, they're showing resilience, all those things that we talked about last time.
I think one of the activities that most children enjoy that you can really easily do with a blank sheet of paper is start to mix colours and see what happens. You know, just to say, well, what happens if we try this and we mix them together? So just modelling some really, really simple things that get them to put a mark down and start to enjoy that. But that does lead nicely into my next question. Fancy that, eh? So this one says, if I leave my child to it with the paints, all we end up with is a big brown mess. How is this valuable? It seems a waste of paint and paper.
And again, that's just purely around reframing what we're seeing. So again, as parents, you might be looking at that thinking exactly that thought. But actually, when you are dipping your paint into the brush or putting your fingers into the paint, or however it is that you might serve it, I mean, we've talked before about putting paint in little hand soap dispensers. So if you've got that ready mixed paint and you save the kind of hand soap dispensers, wash them out, put your paint in, and children can press down and squirt their own paint out. There's lots of lovely thinking around that, cause and effect. They enjoy doing it, but also you get the ability to mix. But when you are mixing paint, the world doesn't come in kind of red, green, yellow, blue paint in a red, green, yellow, blue pot with a red, green, yellow, blue lid. And it doesn't come with somebody saying, don't put the red brush in the blue pot because then you mix all the paint together. The world of creativity comes from getting the red brush and sticking it in every pot until what you end up with is that khaki brown colour, which is what children always do. Because part of the learning process is the experimentation, the cause and effect. And it's no good you telling me I need to experience this for myself. So no matter what age you introduce children to the ability to free mix paint, whether they've got the ability to do that at 2 or they wait until they're 9 or however old it will be, the first thing they will do is to get all of the colours and mix them together. Always makes me think of taking my 3 boys when they were younger to Nando's, which is a massive treat. And in Nando's they have a drinks dispenser they have like 56 flavours of drink, and we get a bottomless drink in which they'd put some ice to exactly the right level and they had it off to a pat. But then they'd go down the dispenser and go ka-chunk, 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 and they'd have Fanta and 7-Up and Diet Coke and Dr Pepper. Then they'd come and drink it and they'd be like that, ugh. And I used to say to them, why do you do that? And they would always say, because you can. And it's that idea of experimentation, permission to, independence, creativity. So for me, it's very much about as many opportunities as you can to mix as much paint as you can, to go through that learning process of cause and effect, what happens if, and then children will, and they always do, start to think, well, I want blue for that, and I want orange for that, and I want brown for that, and they will begin to select blue, orange and brown. But in the early stages of paint, that's not what they're thinking. They're thinking this feels great, it smells great, it looks great, it tastes great. And you can get lots of recipes online using corn flour and water and food colouring, where you can make food safe paint. So if you have got very young children that like to put in their mouth, you can do things with that. But the idea of being able to mix and experiment needs to happen for them to be able to come out the other side.
Yeah, and there are so many different, we're focusing on paints here, and we probably need to move away from arts and crafts a little bit in a minute, but there's a few things that I learned that just made so much sense. One of them is have a think about the space you're letting them be creative on. So if you give a really young child that's still probably mark making like this, a tiny little piece of A4 paper, it is probably going to end up all over your surface and so on. They need a much bigger canvas than that. So that's one of the thinkings. But then the other thinking was, again, back to one of my first 5 years mantras, which is sort of the more that you do for them, the less they learn. So if you buy the ready-made paints, then it's all served up on a plate for them ready to go. Whereas if you buy the powder paints and start to get involved with mixing them, and do you want them thick, do you want them thin? You even said things like, you can put flour in it to make it thicker, or even sand to make it gritty. Yeah. And all of these decisions, obviously this is as they're getting slightly older, but this is how you can extend the learning opportunities that go on by letting them do more and more and more of the setup of their own play room. And
making mud paint outside and all sorts of different things that you can do, and take the engagement to them. Even things like, and we will move away from paint, painting the wheels of cars, the wheels of scooters, painting the feet of dinosaurs, and experimenting with mixing and moving and printing and all sorts of things you can do by using items that really engage your children in their play and bring an element of creativity into that. And a kind of link to that, if we think about creativity in its broader sense, you've got things like storytelling, so what we'd call often small world play, which is that idea of the little imaginative play that you create, where you don't need loads of resources for that. The more imaginative a child is, the less resources that you need. Because if I haven't got a great deal of experience or imagination, I might need a dog to be a dog and a car to be a car. But when I've got a lot more practice at that, I can have a wooden brick or a fir cone or a stone, and they become dogs and cats and cars because my imagination allows that to happen. But building creativity around the use of language, building creativity around the use of story is really important. Because obviously the more language a child experiences and stores, the more language they've got to use, so the better they are to be able to communicate their needs, but also describe their thinking. So things like stories, songs, rhymes are really crucial when it comes to creative development, and opportunities for children to create real worlds that they live in, but a small version, as well as an imagined world, is really powerful for reinforcing and making sense of the world they live in.
This reminds me of another thing that we moved away from with my nursery hat on. So when we used to design our outdoor areas, to begin with, we might have bought a piece of furniture that looked like a fire engine, or that look like a very specific thing. You can buy them in all the sort of nursery catalogues. But what we realised is that actually if we just left the children to bring some of their chairs outside, they'd create all sorts. They might put the chairs 2 by 2 by 2 and say it's a bus or a train or a tram. They will be creative if you give them the space to be creative.
Absolutely.
But if you tell them that we're going to play the wheels on the bus, and we sat on a bus and the bus looks like a bus,
Then it's a bus.
then it's a bus. So,
And also linked into this, which is a whole other line as well, is the concept of gender and how we see ourselves and how society sees the construct of gender. And so when you can be more open-ended in the resources that you give children, you're far less to give gendered resources that appeal for reasons that are too complex to go into now to one particular gender or another usually. And as a parent, I think when you're thinking about at home, your play space does not need to look like a nursery or a school setting. You can create a really, really valuable play space that engenders creativity with things like rolls of paper, cardboard boxes, toilet roll tubes. So when we're thinking about the making and doing, it's all very available. If we're thinking about mark making, it's all very simple, and you're not having to mark make on anything special like a board colouring book. It can be the back of a cardboard box. But if we're thinking about things like the small world play, then again, you've got toilet roll tubes that you can turn into people, you've got boxes you can turn into houses or aeroplanes. So the world is literally your oyster. And then our role as a parent is to support by scaffolding around the children's play, adding to their ideas and demonstrating some of our own.
and when we say that you can turn those toilet rolls into play children, we don't mean literally by drawing faces on them and doing adult artwork again for the kids. It's just that you do see a child sometimes with two blocks,
whatever, maybe you've seen them blocks.
and just, they've turned into dogs and cats and dinosaurs and whatever they may be. They don't need to look like the real thing. In fact, the more ambiguous they are, the more they're going to use their imagination.
Unless, of course, you've got a child that says, I want this to be me and I want this to be my sister, and they go off and get the felt tips in the drawer. The brilliant thing about a toilet roll tube is, if you draw a face on it and stick hair in it, whatever it may be, for one set of play, and then it can be recycled, and there are plenty more toilet roll tubes, there are always toilet roll tubes, then that means that you can have vast combinations of things that you can use those tubes for. And don't forget, really good resources are things like, if you've got a local wallpaper shop or carpet shop that will sell you or give you usually sample books, so wallpaper sample books, carpet in a tube, so the big tubes that carpet comes rolled up into, our local carpet shop would often drop those off on my drive, and I used to just cut those up into smaller bits, either to take into work or for the kids to use. So a real push on things that are readily available, that don't cost you a fortune, that can then be recycled, and also makes children just think, and us think really inventive, because once you start thinking about that, you'll never walk past a skip or you're like, oh, that would be handy, or I could have one of those. Or so it's starting to think in that way.
I think one of the favourite pictures I've got of Olivia is that she's on the phone to a banana.
Yeah.
So the banana was a phone, and I just loved it because I went, yes, you're using your imagination. Of course, a banana's a banana, but today it's also a phone.
And then you can eat the phone, which is great.
Even better, and then you can throw it in the recycling. And
Absolutely.
there's no mess either. So, mess. I'm doing really well leading into my questions here.
Anyone think you've done it before?
So, I hate it. This is another question, sorry. So we always ask people to let us know any questions they've got, either beforehand or during the live. So we've had a few been sent in before, which is really, really helpful. And this one, and I can kind of relate to this, although I did, by my third child, I was definitely okay with it. I hate it when my child gets dirty clothes. Or when he gets his clothes dirty. But I see lots of children literally playing in the mud and making a mess. And if I believed it was valuable, maybe I could let go. But what are they learning by getting so messy? Now, I know on Instagram we see immaculate children on some of them, but we also see some children literally head to toe in mud, splashing in the puddles, digging holes. And I look at it and it just makes my heart sink. But I can imagine other people look at it and go, that's just, full of germs and they're going to catch a cold and they're making a right mess. What are they getting from that? So,
but again, that's
reframe our thinking.
It's all live on its own, basically. But there's tons is the answer. So if you think about the developmental processes in terms of, sensory process for one. So not all children love getting messy, and that's the truth. So sometimes you have to really respect a child's wishes around whether they want to feel that kind of mud through their toes or not. But sensory-wise, you get lots of that benefit from there. You're getting different kind of textures, you're getting things that are going to help you to reframe the knowledge that you've already got in your own head by different experience. You've got loads of cause and effect, why things do what they do. You've got the creativity of just, if you've never had, mud squeezed through your toes before, if you've never had your hands in soil and you don't know how it smells and how it feels, or what you might find in there, so what you might see, the little insects that might be in there, the stones that you can pick out. In fact, you can squeeze the soil and it goes all hard in your hands, so it's showing how materials can transform themselves with different cause and effect around them. So there are not obvious headlines, so you're not going to learn to read, you're not going to learn tricky words, you might not learn, but you are learning gross motor, fine motor, balance, prediction, cause and effect, cognition, thinking, strategy, creative thinking, you're storing knowledge, you're retrieving knowledge. It's literally the more physical experience you can have. Because for your brain, if I just look at something and I look at it and try and remember it, then my brain is only using one thing to help me to have that learning take place. If I can see it, hear it, smell it, taste it, touch it, move it, then my brain is using multiple areas simultaneously, which means it's far more likely to stick. So, yes, we're not saying just let your children crawl around in the dirt and eat huge handfuls of mud, although there's also really interesting research about the development of the immune system and how actually there are things in the outdoors, so in mud and leaves and all that kind of stuff, low level bacteria that really help children to develop their immune system. So the more of that kind of play they can get, the stronger their immune system can be. But also it's innate in us as human beings to want to, or having a connection with the outdoors, and that also includes the touching of, the feeling of, and the sensations around all the stuff we're going to come into contact with.
Yeah, we've had a couple of comments here on the live. So one from Explore, Play, Discover, just saying that connection to nature, which you've just alluded to there. And then Baylor81T, some of these handles are amazing, said good for your mental health as well. And I have to say, when you look at these videos of children getting really stuck in to messy play, they typically have absolute joy on their face.
They do.
It's like, I've been let to do this, yay!
And I remember with my boys when they were little, and if they went out with my mum, who was a teacher, and my dad had bin bags in the back of his car, and they used to completely expect my three boys, who were all a bit maverick in their nature, to come back very dirty. And he just used to tell them to step into a bin bag, which he didn't tie it, but it came up to kind of their shoulders, and he just used to lift them in the car and strap them in. And I think they were very much of the mindset that I expect boys or children, I only had boys, children of this age to come back dirty, because that's the innate human curiosity to explore. And if you take them out into the woods where there's a stream and a big muddy bank, you can't expect them to sit on the side and do some quiet colouring in. They're going to be in that mud and in that stream. So again, it's about our expectations of what's authentic for child development.
I think, again, we had to do a lot. When we used to show parents around our nursery, we used to be really open about the fact that we were a bit different in our thinking. And one of the things that we did was that when children were being involved in your typical creative play, your paints and so on, we didn't insist that they put an apron on. In fact, in the end, we didn't bother with aprons at all, because if you give a child a choice, it is really, really unusual that a child says, yes, please, I want to put the apron on that's a bit too tight here and it itches me here, and it just gets in the way of learning, and it's a barrier, isn't it? If you say, no, you can't do this until, you've put this and this on. Let's just take those barriers away and let them get engaged. And what's the worst that can happen is that they're going to get paint and marks over the clothes. And I just think, let's be realistic with the clothes that we put on. Let's make sure that, they wash anyway. If you buy the right paints, or mud is brilliant for washing off. Something about red paint used to be a little bit problematic.
Red and black can be a little bit problematic. But then again, I think for parents, if you forewarned, you're forearmed, and you think, right, my preschool, nursery, school clothes need to be ones that literally come off, go in the washing machine as and when I can, and if they get dirty, then it's kind of not the end of the world. Yeah. I remember once talking to a little boy who I asked him why he didn't enjoy painting. And he said because when you put the apron on, if the person before you has washed their hands after painting, all the water runs down the sleeve, and when you put the apron on you get wet arms, and that's why you didn't like going into the painting area. So sometimes it can be little things like that that inhibit our children from exploring creativity.
There's definitely a nursery nurse on here. Her handle is the mum practitioner. Good old Primani nursery clothes. Completely agree. We used to have a little saying, Primani instead of Armani, please. So in other words, don't go to your childcare setting in your best clothes. Because I think you alluded to it much earlier on in the live, that children should be coming home from a day at a childminder or a day in the park or a day at nursery looking like they've been involved in all sorts. If they're coming home clean, I'd expect them to have a clean face, and I'd expect them to have clean hands, and I'd expect them to have a clean nappy if they weren't potty trained yet. But I wouldn't expect their clothes to be clean. And you know, the only thing I ever wanted as a parent was that if they'd done really wet play, that they were just put in a dry set of clothes, because you don't want to leave a child wet and uncomfortable. But if they'd got paint down themselves, I was absolutely fine with that. I loved it because it meant that they'd been engaged and involved in all sorts during the day.
And I think obviously we're talking about ideals here, and we are both very aware that there are some families who don't have access to things like washing machines on a regular basis. But you would hope that settings would be sensitive to that, and there's certainly settings that I've worked with were, and there are mechanisms in place to enable those children still to engage in that kind of play and still have, you know, clean and maintained uniform. But obviously we know it's not a privilege for everybody to be able to do that.
And also just recognising, somebody's just making a comment that this is clearly linked to writing later.
Yes.
And making that link is, well, it's a developmental stage. The more creative a child is, the more comfortable they are having tools in the hand and making marks with them. They do, I was saying before with Olivia, I started to keep some of the things that she'd done. Sometimes it needed to be a picture because it wasn't something I could physically keep. But you could see things getting more and more intricate. So her face might have started off as being a big round face, but then it might become a little face and a couple of eyes, and then the eyes would start to get eyelashes and ears, and the hands would start to get fingers. And as it got more and more intricate in her own time, you started to see that she's ready. She'll be able to form letters soon because she's beginning to get enough control over that creative stuff.
It's all about that skill development, but also when we talked about on becoming a writer we talked about the fact that part of writing is about the language that comes out of your head through the end of your pencil. So the more creative you're thinking, the more language you've got, the more creative your use of language, the better writer you become, because writing really is just the physical ability to record thought or someone else's thought. So actually you've got the creativeness in terms of all of the creative activities you do around painting, drawing. You've got the creativeness around physical development, but then you've got the creativeness around thinking that will make you into a better writer. So all of these things connect.
So we've hit our time limit. In fact, we've gone a little bit over actually. So any sort of ending thought on the topic?
No.
Oh, don't say no.
I think the ending thought is, I think as a parent, would be just to try and think slightly differently and make it easy. Being creative is not difficult. Doing activities is difficult. Setting up activities, you'll find you spend more time clearing away the activity than the child probably does engaging with it. But if you think about creativity beyond paint, think about creativity as that process of becoming creative both in your thoughts, your thought processes and your actions. Keep it simple, but just provide as many opportunities as you can for your child to be a creative problem solver and interpret the resources that you give them.
Cool, thank you for cooperating.
You're welcome.
So lastly, our next live, so it's in 2 weeks' time. It's on the 5th of April. We're going to go for another nighttime slot because whilst at the end of the day we seem to get the same engagement later with the videos, I think we get more Q&A when we go outside of hours. So we're just going to go back to the 7:30 slot next time, and that is all going to be about the power of outdoor play. So we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Bye.
Oh, we forgot to tell them about the downloadable, I forgot
resource.
What we call it now.
Yeah.
Downloadable, it's not resource either.
It's just, yeah.
We can't remember its name. We've got a downloadable PDF anyway, all about, oh completely lost our train of thought now. All about creativity.
It's very creative.
It's very creative.
It's very good.
It's in the bio, and anybody that wants to download it, and if you're tuning in from a nursery or a childminder or a nanny, you can freely share that PDF as well. Let's get more and more people being as creative as possible. Thanks very much. And you've got to turn it off.
Thanks again. Yeah, I'm just going to smile and I'll go. Thanks everybody. See you.